Hello. Oops. Just make sure we're all plugged in. 1 second. There we go. And we are now live. Hello everybody and welcome to Shadows of York, a virtual ghost walk for you all tonight. If you could just please leave me a comment and let me know that you can hear me. Hello Sharon, good, I can see your comments, that's excellent. And if you could just leave me a comment to say that you can hear me please, and then we can get started. Hi Nigel, hi Louise, hi Joanne. Sorry if I'm a couple of minutes late, I was just trying to avoid some loud people. Nicola, thank you for confirming that you can hear me. That's superb, wonderful. Oh, excuse me, it is runny nose weather tonight, guys. Oh, bit nippy, but not as bad as it was a couple of months ago. So, yes, once again, welcome to the Shadows of York virtual ghost walk, and thank you for joining me. And tonight, obviously, I'm going to take you around the city of York. Now, some of the stories you may have heard, some of them you may not. If you've never seen me before, then you probably won't have heard any of them. And just in case you've never seen me before, my name is Mackenzie, and obviously I'm going to be looking after you tonight. I say looking after you. You're nice, safe and sound at home. It's me that needs looking after. So I'm going to quickly turn you around now so you can see where I am. Here. I am outside St. Michael le Belfrey church, quite a large church, which is situated right next to the minster. And this here is the lovely minster. Hope you can see that. It's also very, very quiet here in the city centre tonight. However, that does not mean that we might not get ambushed by odd one or two people, so if that happens then I'll just strike pause and I'll be right back. But we've never had an issue before, so hopefully we won't have an issue tonight. Now, St. Michael le Belfrey Church is actually where Guy Fawkes was famously baptised. I say famously, it wasn't famous at the time, but became famous after the Guy Fawkes night, shall we call it, the night when he tried to blow up the Houses of Parliament, and of course King James when he was visiting. But he was thwarted, as you know, and then he was hung, drawn and quartered. But we'll be talking more about that next week for my next talk about the British execution. And also, just to point out, over there, this pub here, it's called the Guy Fawkes Inn. And it's said that in the cottage behind the Guy Fawkes Inn is where he was meant to have been born. There you go, little bit of history for you there. But we're going to make our way around the corner. Excuse me. Hello, hello, hello everybody. By the way guys, as we walk along, please feel free to ask questions. I may not be able to answer them whilst I'm doing the live all the way through, just because sometimes they get missed or I'm in the middle of a story. But don't worry, I will go through the comments as best as I can after the walk, and I will respond to all your questions, and if I haven't answered, then feel free to drop me a message and I will answer as best as I can. Oh, thank you, Claire, and to you too. Another sight of the minster here, there you go. So York is reported to be one of the most haunted cities in England, if not perhaps Europe, and that's a really big claim. I'm not sure if it's true or not because I've never been to every single city and village and town in all of Europe and could never confirm to you, but that is meant to be its reputation. We are called the City of 1,000 Ghosts, and if you look to your feet, I say your feet, I'm doing it like I'm on the real tour here, if you could see through the ground beneath our feet all over York, you would be able to see literally thousands and thousands of bodies, because York is one huge graveyard, one massive graveyard, and this is because obviously they've been burying bodies ever since 71 AD, when the Romans first founded York. But it wasn't called York at the time, it was called Iberacum. And after that, the Vikings came along and called it Jorvik. Actually, no, they didn't. Before that, it was the Anglo-Saxons. They called it Eforwick or Eforwick. Then it was Jorvik, and then eventually became York. I prefer York. Nice, straightforward, easy to pronounce. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. Tonight, I feel a little bit nervous, and I don't know why. I've got a feeling, and I don't know if it's just because I'm walking around and it's pretty dark tonight, or if it's that something might happen tonight. There's no guarantees, but sometimes strange things do happen on tour. But I think it's because I discovered something a couple of weeks ago, and I can't wait to tell you all about it later on in this tour. First of all, I'm going to take us around to the treasurer's house. I'm going to show you another shot of the minster here, and it looks like they've got lights on here. There you go. I believe that is the largest stained glass window in the country. The minster is actually home to about 80% of stained glass in the whole country as well. So it's quite a lot. And it is a magnificent Gothic cathedral. It was completed in 1472 and took roughly just over 250 odd years to build. Jerry Cannell, it's because you're there, you have that effect. Hello Jerry, good to see you. Do you know what, Jerry? Maybe it is. Ladies and gents, I'm going to introduce you to my friend Jerry there. I used to do scare attractions, and that's how I came to know Jerry. Jerry worked on what was called the Sanctuary in Alton Towers when he played a very mad doctor, and became quite famous at the time, didn't you, Jerry? And we've been friends ever since. Now look at that. That there is the treasurer's house. Now sadly I can't get into the grounds tonight, but this is home to one of the most famous ghost stories, not just in York, but also in all of England. And if you've never heard of it, don't worry, because you're about to hear the story. In 1953, a young man called Harry Martindale was working down in the cellars of this treasurer's house. He was minding his own business. He was just chiselling away into the wall. Now what he was doing is he was installing some new pipework into the boiler system. Now this lad was working on his own down in the cellars, stood on top of his ladder, and there wasn't an awful lot of lighting down there. We're talking just a couple of battery-powered torches and things, so bright enough to do the job, but not exactly like a proper light switch, so it's quite dark down there. And as he was working away, chiselling away, he thought he could suddenly hear what sounded like a horn. And he looked about him and thought, yeah, somebody must be playing an instrument really badly upstairs, and so he ignored it and he carried on chiselling. But then this horn, it got louder and louder and louder, and eventually he looked down from his ladder, and to his amazement and horror he saw what he described as a Roman soldier blowing on a horn come out of the wall. Now, as soon as he saw this, you can imagine, he fell straight off his ladder, landed square on his back, and then he looked up at this Roman. Now, the Roman did not appear to notice Harry, but instead continued to march straight past him and blowing on this horn, and then he vanished in the opposite wall. When Harry looked again, he saw another Roman riding on top of a black horse come out of the wall, march past him and then vanish. And he looked again and he saw another Roman and then another Roman marching 2 by 2 from one side of the room to the other. Now, as soon as they had finally stopped appearing from the walls, you can imagine Harry got to his feet, shot straight out of the cellars, across the hall, went up the stairs, and he crashed into the then curator. And the curator simply looked him up and down and said, "Here, lad, by the look on you, I'd say you've seen them Romans." Now Harry went mad and said, "What do you mean, I've seen them Romans? Do you mean to tell me that I've been working down here for nearly a week and nobody thought to warn me?" Now the curator simply said, "Here, now then lad, it's not my fault. I've never seen anything like it myself. It's just them that come flying up them stairs that tell me they've seen a Roman soldier. Here lad, you best sit yourself down and tell us your tale because you look white as a sheet. Get it off your chest." Now bless him, Harry actually sat down, told his story as I've told to you, and he even drew pictures. And I'm going to turn you around now. He drew pictures and he said, well, these Roman soldiers, they weren't like what I'd expect a ghost to look like when you could see straight through them. No, these chaps were as solid as you and I. If I really wanted to reach out and touch them, I probably could, but I daren't. And they wore a green tunic beneath their body armour. They carried a round circular shield, and they appeared to be walking on their knees. I could not see them from the knees down. Oh, and they had like a dagger or a sword attached to the right-hand side. And I'm so pleased that they did not appear to notice me, because if they did, I have no idea what I would have done. Anyway, the curator looked at him and said, well, Harry, that's very in-depth, but I'm going to let you in on two things. First of all, lad, I would not tell anybody that story for the simple reason it's a bit far-fetched. And I aren't being funny, but if you were in the pub and somebody told you that tale, you'd never believe it, would you? Secondly, Harry, I don't know what you think you've seen, but it certainly ain't Roman soldiers. Romans, lad, did not wear green tunics beneath their body armour. They did not carry round circular shields. They were always long and red. And the weaponry was never on the right-hand side. It was always on the left, so they could draw the swords across the body. And as for walking on their knees, I can't help you. If I were you, lad, I would say you're just working alone in the dark. The imagination does some strange things to people. Get yourself off home for the night and then calm yourself down, and tomorrow maybe you'll come back and finish the job. Harry's response, "Ha! If you think I'm coming back after what I've just witnessed, you can stick your job. I'm off." And he did. He left his tools, everything. He refused to go back to that treasurer's house or down into the cellars. He was having none of that ever again. No way. And he went home. And he had time to reflect on what the curator had told him, and he thought, yeah, I don't want to get laughed at. And so he decided to keep this to himself, and he would never tell a soul. And he also knew exactly what he'd seen, and he knew he'd never ever forget it. And then about 20 odd years passed. It's now the 1970s. In the 1970s in York, archaeologists were digging all around, and they discovered lots of medieval remains, Viking remains, Roman, Georgian and Victorian, you name it. And in Coppergate we discovered lots of Viking remains, hence why we now have the Jorvik Viking Centre, well worth a visit. And also they were digging around in the treasurer's house. And I've got another shot of the treasurer's house. We're at the back now. There you go. They were digging around inside, and they discovered that underneath the cellar floor was an old Roman road. And this road led from the Minster all the way past through Stonegate and out of the city, but also came past the treasurer's house and out of the city in that direction. And not too far away from York, they discovered some Roman remains wearing green tunics beneath their body armour. They appeared to have been buried with round circular shields. The weaponry was indeed on the right-hand side, not on the left, as they always believed. And this report came back to the treasurer's house. excuse me, runny nose. This report came back to the Treasurer's house, and the curator is still here, but a much older gentleman, and that description leapt out at him, and he was absolutely anxious to track down Harry. He eventually did. He invited Harry back to the house and asked of him very nicely if he could please tell his story all over again, if he could actually remember what he'd seen all those years ago. And Harry recounted his story all over again, and he never changed a single detail, not one single solitary detail. And the curator then asked of him, Harry, would you be brave enough to come down into the cellars and point out which way those Romans came and went? And bless him, he did. He actually went down into the cellars, pointed out the very direction, and then the curator said this. Harry, all those years ago, I advised you to never tell anybody that story for the simple reason that it was far-fetched, no one would ever believe you, etc. However, I've got a report here telling me everything that you have just reported. And also, I'm going to tell you now, Harry, that you've pointed the correct direction in which the road would have led out of the city. But the point I'm making is this. You, a young man with a very basic education, could never have told me what these soldiers looked like because we have only just discovered it. Myself, the Treasurer's House and the National Trust beg you to go public. Hello there. Beg you to go public and tell your story, and we will all back you up. No one's going to laugh at you, Harry. We believe you. And he did. It went public and it became national news at the time. And now, whenever you pick up a ghost book in England, 9 times out of 10, you'll always find the story of the Treasurer's house because of this evidence to back it up. Now, obviously, like everything else, the Treasurer's house has been locked up, but thankfully, when everything opens up again, one day the lovely Treasurer's house will also open up. That's because I looked up, sorry. It'll open up and you can come and visit. It is a magnificent house, full of history, ghosts, and of course you can go into the cellars and see if you can spot a Roman soldier. Now, I'll just turn you back around again. It is literally here, beneath my feet, where the cellars is. Now, I didn't know this at the time, but in one of my videos, I think it was part 2, for those of you who have not watched it, I did a live video with a lady called Mad Alice. Mad Alice runs the bloody tour of York. She's a lovely lass, and she also used to work here at the Treasurer's house. And one time I was standing just here. Now, I may have mentioned earlier that I'm a little bit sensitive. And as I was standing here, I said, oh yeah, I feel like my legs are heavy, like I can't walk through, like I'm wading through water or something. And then she revealed to me that actually, Mackenzie, it's right underneath your feet where the cellars are. So maybe you're just reenacting how heavy it would have been to walk through concrete, trudging through the road. Now, whether that's true, I do not know, but it's an interesting thought, isn't it? And that's quite a tame story. I say tame. If you were down in the cellars and that happened to you, you'd freak out, wouldn't you? But that is one of our most famous stories here in York. I always like to get the first one out of the way. Oh, a bit of stopping and starting. But I do feel very, very nervous tonight, and I don't know why. Whew. Maybe something's going to happen. No guarantees, as I say, but we'll wait and see. Oh. We've got 300 viewers. How lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, I've got a few chatty folk over here, so we shall bypass them. Hopefully it won't be picked up on the camera. I'm going to head off towards Bedern. Bedern is a lovely little estate, and there's currently a house for sale down there. It's only small, and if you've got £500,000, you can have it. Yes, it's a pretty penny to live in our city, but it is a beautiful city. If you go a little bit out of the city of York, then it's a bit cheaper. This here is the St William's College. It is a magnificent building, and I'm just going to point something out to you here. I hope that it's going to show up. You see this? This here is a mouse carved into the door. There is another one, but you won't be able to see it with the lighting, but he's somewhere just in... Oh, you might be able to just see just there. If not, when you come on your travels to York, come to St William's College and find these doors, and you will find a little mice carved in the doors. Now that was done by what we call him the Kilburn mouse. I think, oh, the mice of Kilburn. Sorry, Mr. Mouseman. He used to carve mice into his work. There is a little bench inside the minster. Speaking of which, let's get a shot of the minster. There you go. So if you go into the minster, you'll find a little bench with a little mouse on it, and there's lots of little various pieces of furniture throughout the country with this mouse. That is his signature. So if you happen to be at home and you've got a little mouse on your bit of furniture, you now know where it's come from. This building here, you can actually stay in it. If you pop along to the National Trust website and you want to stay in York, you can actually stay and actually observe the minster from your window. We will be popping down Goodramgate, but not just yet. Now this is the story I was so excited to tell you, and this is probably why I'm so nervous. So very nervous. Oh. Just cross over here. This here is Bedern. And I'll explain as we go around the corner what my problem is. I say a problem, it's not a problem, but it has freaked me out, and you're going to find out why. Good evening, Neil. Don't worry, Michael, I'll look after myself, thank you. I've got my little, what do they call these things on sticks? Selfie sticks, that's it. I'll just give them a whack with that. You can tell I'm forgetting my words tonight, that's how nervous I am. Anyway, this here is Bedern. One of these lovely buildings, as I say, is up for sale. So if you've got 500k, you can have one. Now this over here is quite dark, but this here is Bedern Hall. This is all that truly remains of Bedern. It's quite dark, so I'll just take us round the corner. Hiya, Nigel. Now this is actually one of the routes I'll take you down when you're on a normal tour. And I'll probably tell you a story about orphan screams, about a workhouse. There you go, there was a knock. What was that? That's frightened me. Okay, so this is Bedern Hall, very beautiful, nice and eerie. It is all that remains of Bedern, if you will. Bedern was one of the poorest areas in York, but initially it was built for the priests to live in, and this, we believe, was the mess hall for the priests. All these buildings obviously weren't here, but once upon a time this was the slums of York. Now the story goes, I'm going to give you the short version, is that there used to be an old workhouse here. I'll turn you around. There used to be an old workhouse here, and the master of this workhouse, Mr. George Pym, he was paid very handsomely to keep the children off the streets of York. However, he was a really tight-fisted, nasty piece of work, paid out very little on food and clothing for the children, and a raving alcoholic. Now, if her child died, then his supplement for that child would be docked by the church. He didn't like that idea, so whenever a child died, sometimes, instead of reporting their deaths, he would simply bury them at random spots around York. Now this went on for several years until one cold night when it was so cold he couldn't dig into the ground. The ground was solid with ice and snow, and so he started to hide them inside the workhouse, under the floorboards, in his cupboard, in the walls. Horrible man. But over time his conscience got the better of him, and he started to see these children, and they'd be screaming and whispering and giggling, mocking him. Eventually it drove him mad, and he went around the workhouse and butchered every last child. Of course, he's then arrested and he's put inside the York Lunatic Asylum. And that's not me being cruel by calling it that. That is exactly what it was called. In later years, it then became Bootham Park Hospital. Now, it's said that the workhouse was pulled down and in its place was built some more houses or a school. And even today, around here, in these modern builds, they can still hear the children screaming and crying and whispering and giggling. However, after extensive research, because for those of you who have seen me in the past, you know, as much as I believe in ghosts, I'm feeling incredibly nervous tonight. And I do believe in ghosts, and I do love a good ghost story. I also like to know the truth, because sometimes the truth is far more harrowing and better. Now, I say sadly, I'm actually quite pleased about this, but this story is not true. There is no evidence of there ever being a workhouse here. Nobody was ever butchered. There was no horrible, nasty workhouse guy that got executed or put in an asylum. So that's good. But then, where has the stories of children screaming, giggling, whispering, etc., where has it come from? Because those reports are genuine. Those have happened. Those have been reported. And whilst people have been on tour, my tour, they have felt small cold hands cling to theirs, tugging at their pockets and their coats, and that has happened, not every single time, but on odd occasions. And I had no idea why. No reason, no rhyme and reason, except for that maybe because this was a slum area, I'm going to turn you around again now. Because this was a slum area, lots of people, including children, in fact especially children, would have died. Mortality rate was poor, particularly in city centres, because our cleanliness was poor. In fact, if you go back to my old Victorian talk, funerals and mourning, a couple of weeks ago, you'll learn all about that. Anyway, a light's just come on. Goody, we're in for a great night. Anyway, I'll quickly tell you this bit before I move on to what I discovered just a couple of weeks ago. You see this bit over here? I have told this story before in a previous talk. I couldn't tell you which one. But one day, about 12 years ago, let's say, I'm knocking on now, 12 years ago, I was walking around York thinking innocently that maybe I could rent a flat. And I'd never really ventured out of the main areas. So I ventured out and saw this, and it was during the day, a bright summer's day, and I spotted these. And I thought, aye, I wonder what these are. I wonder if these are up for rent. No sooner had I just turned the corner over there, did I feel very firmly a small hand grab mine. Right, I'm going to flick you around again. A small hand grabbed mine. And I instantly thought, oh dear, little kids wandered off from mum and dad, grabbed the wrong person's hand, we've all done that. So I looked down and said, here, you've grabbed the wrong hand, love. Nobody there, no one there. And I looked around the corner, down the road there, and there was nobody there. No child could have run off that quickly, and I would have heard them. And that was a very definite grab, and it actually really, really freaked me out. And yet I still continued to walk down this street. Now that's always made me think there's got to be something. Whilst I was looking up stories for the last couple of talks, it's probably more than 2 weeks ago now, I was reading a book called A Grim Almanac of York, and it turns out that in April in 1846, check me out, I remember the date. In 1846 April, there was a group of children playing in Bedern in an alley. Now, obviously Bedern has changed dramatically since then. The only alley that I know of is this, where I had my hand grabbed just over there. A group of children were playing. There was one little lad called George Lazenby, who was 8 years old, and I'm going to quickly say this in case you've watched other videos. It's not the same George Lazenby who lived at the Treasurer's house. Totally different person, okay? But this little lad, he was called George Lazenby, he was only 8 years old, and he was taunting one of the other lads in the group called William Wilkinson, who was 13 years old. It obviously really wound him up because William went over, grabbed little George, picked him up and threw him down on the pavement. And it's said that he smacked his head on the cobbles. He then went home crying, did little George, went home crying and complaining of a headache, which you're going to have a bit of a headache after you've smacked it on a cobbled street. His mother then takes him to the local chemist. The chemist looks him up and down and says, "You want to get into a hospital ASAP." Now by this point George was rapidly becoming more and more ill, and by the time they got to York Hospital, he unfortunately had collapsed and was barely conscious. He later died that night in hospital from his head injuries. Unfortunately, it doesn't tell you what became of William Wilkinson, but I imagine it would have been manslaughter, and he probably just got put in a little, not a prison, but young boys' prison, if you will, or he probably would have been sent to a type of workhouse. He probably would have got the birch as well, something like that, but I cannot find anything about that. However, I did find it quite fascinating to find out that a boy actually hurt himself or was hurt by another lad in the alley just there. There is actually names for these children, and he was 8 years old, and it was a very small hand that grabbed mine. Was it George Lazenby who grabbed my hand and probably plays with other people's pockets and coats in this street? Is it him that's screaming on a night? It's entirely up to you what you think, but I was really thrilled when I found that. Really thrilled and a bit freaked out because I've wanted to know for years and years and years what that would have been. So yes, I'm going to flick you around again. It was literally here, right here, where my hand was grabbed. So imagine that all these years ago, that little accident, I say accident, falling out took place just somewhere, potentially around here. Now that's a new story I've never told before. I'm going to take you down this way for a change. Maybe that nervousness will go away now. Excuse me guys, it's very runny nose weather, so I'm just going to quickly blow my nose. Oh, excuse me, so sorry. Oh, that's better. It is terrible, Helen, absolutely terrible. Unfortunately, these things have happened. Now this here is Goodramgate, a lovely, lovely street filled with shops, pubs, restaurants, you name it. And now I'm going to let you have a little look at this lovely Tudor build here. Excuse me. Now that is a great restaurant if you ever get a chance to come, and the pub next door, the Snickle Way Inn, is also a great pub. And I'm just going to hide myself away in here and tell you this rather sad story. Now, once upon a time, here in this house, there lived a family, and they had a little boy called Marmaduke. His name was Marmaduke Buckle. Now, it's already tragic with a name like that, isn't it? Marmaduke Buckle. And he was born in 1698. He unfortunately was born with a disability, and the the books never tell you whether it was a physical disability, a mental one, or both. But either way, poor Marmaduke was born in the wrong time to have a disability, because in those days we used to put you in prisons, we used to beat you, we used to hang you just for having a mental health problem. Sometimes if you had a wart on your face or marks and stuff, we might accuse you of witchcraft and you'd be executed for that. So we're not kind, we're not considerate, we're really horrible, nasty people. And poor Marmaduke is born into this fairly well-to-do family, but they are thoroughly embarrassed and disgusted that they have such a son in their life. And they constantly criticise him, they tell him so, they tell him what a burden he is to them financially and socially. And Marmaduke, when you grow up, who on earth is going to love you and marry you? You are a waste of space. Look at you. Poor lad. So he's constantly bullied throughout his life. And when he gets to the age of 17, he decides there's no point in living anymore and he decides to end it all. But first, he scratches his name into the wall. Marmaduke Buckle. The year he was born, which was 1698. The year that it now was, 1715, and his age, 17. He then proceeds to hang himself from a wooden beam. Poor lad. Now, despite all this, it's said that his ghost is meant to be quite friendly and approachable, and he likes to try and make use of himself by tidying up. Ah, bless him. And don't we all want a ghost like that? One that does the ironing, the dishes, maybe a bit of wallpapering. We all want a ghost like that. Anyway, when I read this story, short but tragic, I thought, oh, bless him. But if it's true, then there's got to be an inscription somewhere saying Marmaduke Buckle and all the dates. Now, before I pointed this house out to you, in many of the books, none of these stories knew which building it was in. Absolutely none of them. Several of them, years later, started to say that it was here at the Snickle Way Inn pub. So me being me, had to know, popped in the pub one day, found this barmaid and said, "Excuse me, love, bit of an odd one for you. I don't suppose you happen to have Marmaduke Buckle written on your wall anywhere?" And hang on a second, somebody's playing music now. Hope you can hear me all right. So, excuse me, love, I hope you don't mind, but have you got Marmaduke Buckle written on your wall? And she looked at me funny and says, "No, nothing like that here. Why?" And I says, "Well," and I explained the story to her. And she turned her nose up and went, "Ooh, no, nothing like that here. I've got a ghost girl on the steps, does that help you?" And I says, "No, thank you very much, but no, it's got to be Marmaduke, thanks." Really embarrassed, as you can imagine. Anyway, I walked out of there, went in one or two other shops further up that looked old enough, but none of them knew anything about the story or indeed this inscription. So I actually cast this to one side, thinking it's absolute rubbish, I ain't telling that on tour. And then 3 months later, I was here at this restaurant on a hen do, minding my own business. And then I went upstairs to the ladies, and as I was in the ladies, it literally just popped into my head, Marmaduke Buckle. And I thought, oh yeah, here, this building's old enough. I'm drunk enough, why not? I'll find out. Ran downstairs, found this poor waiter and says to him, "Excuse me, love, I don't suppose you've got Marmaduke Buckle written on your wall anywhere, have you?" And he says, "Yeah, I do actually. Why? Do you want to see it?" And I said, "Oh, yes, please." Take that how you will. Anyway, bless him, he didn't have to, but he took me up 2 flights of stairs. So we went up, not to this level here, up to that top level there. And I think, from memory, it might have been that middle window. And in there is like a private dining room, I believe. And he flicked on a light, and there it was, with a glass panel over the front of it to preserve it. Marmaduke Buckle. The year he was born, the year that he died, and his name, his age even, 17. So I was proud as punch and said, would you mind awfully if I took a photograph of this and showed it on my tours and stuff? And he said, yeah, sure, no problem. So I actually have the very photograph, which I'll post on the page later. I know I've posted it many times before, but I'm sure people never get sick of seeing it. And I was really pleased to have seen that. And so I did actually go back to the books to reread this story, and it turns out that a lot of the books, not only did they not know which building it was in, but they clearly hadn't done their research because they all got the date wrong. They all put 1697 when in actual fact it was 1698. So you now know the truth, and later on you're going to see the inscription. I was really happy about that one. But anyway, I did ask the waiter here at the restaurant and said, have you ever noticed a ghostly spectre then? And he says, oh aye. I says, oh goody, does he help? You know, is he helpful? And he says, no. He smashes the dishes, turns the lights on and off and pulls chairs out from underneath people as they're about to sit down. Oh no, we could do without him. I says, all right, he's not helpful then. And then says to him, oh, come on now, he is a ghost. Maybe he's just trying to help, but he can't. I did try to defend him, but he was having none of it, so there we go. And Marmaduke Buckle, bless him, did exist. He was born in that house. By his own hand, he died in that house. And useful or not, he haunts that house. Which is now a lovely restaurant. Now I know there's a car here. It is slightly busier down this road, but I wanted to point out this to you. It's quite interesting. You see this row of houses here? This is what we call Our Lady's Row, and they were built, get this, they were built in the 1300s. I think the official date is 1316. That's how old they are. Magnificent, absolutely magnificent. And we shall move along. Nikki, there's a shop around there that sells all sorts of unusual gifts that the kids love, but I can't go in because it makes me feel sick on the second floor. Oh, okay. Do you know which one? Is it just a feeling that you have? You'll have to let us know if you ever come back which shop it is, and then we'll do an investigation. Speaking of investigations, I've got a couple of friends that run Paranormal Research York, and they'll be opening up again soon. So if you pop along to their website, look up Paranormal Research York. They do ghost hunts in places around York that have never been, or I say never, there's one or two places that have been investigated, there's the words, investigated. But they do a lot of buildings that have never been investigated before in York, and they've got some great buildings coming up, but I'm not going to tell you which ones. You're going to have to go and look it up yourself as and when they make them available. Now then, we are going to go this way. I should turn you around. Hi Melanie from the US, welcome, good to see you. Now, in front of me there, you'll see that there is a raised bit of ground. That there used to be a church. Now, earlier on I did mention that you're walking on a graveyard all over York, and I'm not kidding, because somewhere around here used to be a graveyard for that church. In fact, until recent years when they re-tarmacked and paved it all, you used to be walking on top of some of the gravestones that were laid down flat. In York, we used to have around 46 to 50 churches, 8 monasteries, as well as the Minster Cathedral. After Henry VIII came along, he got rid of the monasteries, you know, the dissolution of the monasteries, and over the years, churches have been pulled down. But every single one of these churches had a graveyard, and we are said to have roughly about 500,000 bodies buried inside the York City walls. So that's quite a lot of dead. You can't relocate so many 100,000 bodies, and so yes, you are literally walking on top of them all because we did concrete on top of them all and build on top of them all. And in case you haven't guessed, yes, this here is the Shambles. I'll just keep still so you get a good view. A lot of people like to call it the Harry Potter Street. It does look a little bit like Diagon Alley, but no, they didn't film it here. And there's a lot of streets that look like this in Edinburgh, which I assume is where she actually got the inspiration for rather than the Shambles. But who knows? But the Shambles was built in the 1400s, and it was built to be a meat market. Every other one of these shops used to be a butcher's, and all the best cuts of meat were put along these shelves or hung up above our heads on hooks. All the blood and guts and bits and pieces they don't want is chucked out to the middle of the street so that it can ooze down all the way down to the bottom and then hopefully be swept away from there. And it got cleaned out once every 2 weeks. Imagine that. This here is the York Ghost Merchants. There's lots of people that are big fans and collect all these little ghosts. Some say they look like salt and pepper pots, but they are lovely. I've got a few of them at home as well. Look at all these. So you can come along to York and get yourself one of these little fellas, take it home so it can haunt your house. Isn't that sweet? Now I'm going to let you know on a little fun fact here. There's a little sign there that says Little Shambles. Well, this used to be a street. The buildings were all really narrow, just like this. And this was known as, obviously, Little Shambles. Eventually you'd come round the corner into what was called Goodramgate. And there is a lovely little old Tudor house down there which does some fantastic teas and coffees and foods and things. So again, I do highly recommend it. And funny enough, speaking of ghosts, we're going to pass a lovely little tea room, another one of my favourites here, called the Earl Grey Tea Rooms. And this is a story I actually got off TripAdvisor of all places. Apparently it made the news a few years ago that a lady went to the toilets, which I've been in many a time before, here at the Earl Grey Tea Rooms, and she encountered a ghostly boy. Yes, clearly he went in the wrong loos, didn't he? There you go. Sorry, love. Here's another interesting fact for you. In the old days, you probably already know this, but we used to empty our bedpans out of the windows. Now, if you happen to be walking down that street and somebody emptied their bedpan out the window, do you reckon you're going to dodge it? It's not very likely, is it? Imagine that you're on your way to meet your mates for a cup of coffee and somebody throws out their their wee all on top of you, and the poo and maybe the vomit. Lovely. Try and explain that when you arrive for your coffee. Just tell them crunchy bits are free. Now this here is a Snickleway. A Snickleway is a Ginnell, Snicket, Alley, Close, whatever you want to call them, we call them a Snickleway. And it's known as 1.5 Whitma-Wapma-Gate. Yep, 1.5 Whitma-Wapma-Gate. And over there we have the lovely Golden Fleece pub. Not the big wonky thing, this little narrow one right there. It's said to be one of the most haunted pubs here in York. And starting over the cellars, we have had reports of, guess what? Ghostly Roman soldiers. And this is because it goes down to the old level of Roman York, so it's not an uncommon sighting to see Roman soldiers in pub cellars and in shop basements, and probably in some hotels, to be fair, as well. but also in this pub cellar and one or two others around York. Whenever we executed people out on the Knavesmire, where the racecourse is today, if they were somebody famous, for example, like Dick Turpin, then to make some extra cash out of them, we used to store their bodies overnight in a pub cellar, so that we, the general public, for entertainment, can pop along, pay a penny, go downstairs and have a look at a dead body of a famous person. Yeah, how things have changed, eh? Today we watch Netflix. Back then it was hangings and dead bodies. Now on the ground floor level we've got the ghost of a little boy who was accidentally trampled to death just out here on the road by a horse and cart. Now he's very mischievous. He likes to run off with your drink, or if you've got any shoelaces on, he'll untie those, tie them up again, and then when you stand up you go flying. Rotten swine. I'm not going to spend all night in the Golden Fleece because there is a haunted pubs talk that I've done, so you can pop along and see that. But I do want to tell you about the top window there. That there is the Minster Suite, and it's famously haunted by a World War II Canadian airman. Now you might be thinking to yourself, what the heck is one of them doing in York? But during World War II we were a bit stuck. The Germans were giving us a good bashing, and so the Canadians came over to help us out. Now, we had a little base for them to stay in. It was some wooden huts at the back of the art gallery. Excuse me, back of the art gallery. Now, they are no longer there. But the Canadians were based in these wooden huts, but also they would stay in various hotels and pubs. And one was staying in this room, and his name was Jeff Monroe. But Jeff was heartbroken. Heartbroken because he'd just received word from home that his wife had left him for another man. Now, being truly devastated, absolutely heartbroken, he drank himself stupid, and it said he threw himself out of the window. He met his end on the pavement below. Other accounts say that it was actually the back window of the pub, which is much higher up. Either way, you're still going to break your neck regardless. And this poor man is said to haunt that very room, and you can actually stay at the Golden Fleece in that room. It's called the Minster Suite. It's got a lovely view of the Shambles. Now, we have a lot of reports saying that people are looking in the mirror on a night, brushing their hair, doing their teeth, putting the makeup on, and they see a man standing behind them. They jump, turn around, but he's not there. Then when they look back at the mirror, they see that he's still standing behind them in the reflection. Another one is that people are snuggled up in beds next to their loved ones or whoever they're sharing the room with, and that person's definitely there. They can hear them snoring, farting, kicking them, pinching the covers. You've all been there. So they roll over and they suddenly hear the toilet flush, and whoever they're staying with comes out of the bathroom. Well, hang on a minute, if you're actually stood there, who's this? And when they look, they find that there is nobody there. But there was, seconds, moments ago. So if you fancy staying at the Golden Fleece, you be my guest. Now, I did tell a story recently at home about something that had happened. This is not one for children as such, but I'll ghost over it as best as I can. Haha. No pun intended. I'm hoping the signal's not going to cut out because we're going to be in an overcast section. But I'm going to take you through Lady Peckett's yard. It'll be bright to begin with and then it'll get dark. But Lady Peckett's yard. Now, I actually, 9 years ago, came up on my timeline. Oh God, it actually looks like there's somebody stood in the window there. Oh, that's creepy. Let's see if we can make that bigger. Oh, you can't see it, but I can. If it moves, I'm off. It might be nothing. But it's funny, it's that room that I want to talk about. I said to you I was nervous tonight. Oh, do you know what? Nuts to it, I'm going to stay right here. Actually, let me look behind me. No, it's all right. Whew. probably just something hanging in the window. Let's just pretend it's something hanging in the window and we'll leave it at that. That's pretty freaky. I don't know what it is. It might just be a drape. We'll say it's a drape. Right, so this is Lady Peckett's yard. It's been home to several shops and things throughout its history, but about 9 years ago I used to work for another chap on the Ghost Walk called James. James used to live there, right there. Doesn't live there now, it's empty now. It's now owned by York Gin, I think, anyway. I am going to get closer because I need to know what it is. I'll finish the story in a second, guys, but I've got to go find out now. I don't think it is. I think it's just... No, I think it's just something hanging in the window. Yeah, it's just a curtain, guys. We've debunked it. It's just a curtain, I think. I don't like it. Right, well, I'm going to tell you the story. So anyway, James lived there. I think that might have been his room. And he had sort of this area here. And James, believe it or not, even though he ran a tour, didn't actually believe in ghosts as such. And it's unbelievable because he lived here in what I assume would be very haunted. And yet he'd never witnessed a thing. But you know what? That happens sometimes. Some people just don't believe, and because they don't believe, they don't witness anything. However, he had a friend that lived with him who may or may not have believed in ghosts, but he lived in one of these rooms here. And it's a little bit dark, so I can't point it out, I'm sorry, but he lived somewhere just around there. And this is where it gets a little bit adult, so if you want to send the kids away for 2 seconds, you can do. But basically, Peter, he was called, Peter was in his room, and he could hear some very womanly sounds coming from the attic. No gentleman, just some female sounds, clearly enjoying herself, and I shall leave that to your imaginations now, okay? You and I both know what it meant. And he thought to himself, aye, James has got a bird up there. I'll tell you what, he's done very well, because in the attic there is literally the odd little floorboard, like a very narrow floorboard to get you to the power works and the water works. Otherwise, it's not boarded out. So he thought to himself, I don't know how he's managed that, but good on him. Anyway, the following day, he's talking to James. And he says, here, James, I don't know how you managed it, but well done to you, lad. You clearly enjoyed it. As boys do, they do talk like that, don't they? Anyway, James says, I don't know what you're talking about. I was in bed asleep. He says, get on with you. He says, no, Peter, seriously, I was in my room asleep last night. I don't know what you're talking about. And Peter says, well, didn't you hear what was going on in the attic? He says, no. He says, I was sound asleep and there shouldn't be anybody in the attic because I'm the only one with the key. The keys are in the kitchen, along with the spares. And Peter thought, yeah, okay then. I think he's just embarrassed. Anyway, about a week later, same thing happened again. So Peter thought, I'll have a laugh. I'll go and disturb him. So he went into the kitchen, got the spare sugar. The light's gone out. Okay, I'm definitely in the dark now, guys. Whew, said to you, I felt nervous. So Peter thought, aye, I'll go catch him out. The light's just come back on. Maybe it's on a sensor. Anyway, he goes to the kitchen and gets a key, a spare key, and he goes up to the attic and he can still hear them. And he thinks, yeah, I'm going to catch them. He unlocks the door, opens it up, and there was immediately silence. And so he flicked on a light, looked all over, and there was nobody in that room. And so he came to the conclusion that, we've got a randy ghost that lives here. So yes, ladies and gents, apparently you can still have fun in the afterlife. But after Peter moved out, another lady moved in, and she said that she could see a little girl. And she spoke with a friend of hers, and apparently the little girl may have been called Victoria. So we've had a ghostly little girl that may have been called Victoria, who also haunts this room. Maybe it's her playing with the lights, eh? Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to get the hell out of it now. Because I'm going to confess, I don't like the dark. Yes, the Scare Queen hates the dark. Asleep with the light on. Oh, yes, automatic sensors, I think. That was freaky, whatever was hanging in the doorway. Look at that, my hair's all over. Yeah, it would have been a drape, I'm sure. That would have been cool though, wouldn't it, if we actually caught a ghost. Oh, something of interest. I was talking to one of my historian friends the other day, and you'll see behind me this bank. I'll cross over. You get a better picture of it then. Oof. There we go. See that? Lloyd's Bank? Well, before the bank was built there, they were doing an excavation, part of Jorvik, and they discovered, yes, very good. I'll just wait for them to go, guys. Bless them, they've got the little roller skate, two-wheeled roller skates, and the little beep beeps. Right, as I was saying, that bank there, whilst they were doing an excavation, a little bit of a dig, I think in the 1970s, obviously, and they discovered all the Viking remains, they discovered, get this, a Viking poo. Yeah, Viking poo. Fantastic, that is it. Of all the things you want to discover, but actually you might laugh at that, but you can actually learn an awful lot from poo. You can learn about the diet, what they used to eat and how they lived, and how long they might have lived for with the diets and things like that. So yes, it's amazing what you can learn from that sort of thing apparently. But yes, they discovered a Viking poo, and this poo is on display at the Viking Centre. Thought I'd share that with you. Anyway, another thing to show you here. This area here obviously didn't look like this, but during the times of Elizabeth I, Elizabeth was our excellent Tudor queen of the time. She really was an iron lady, really was a strong woman, and she would get rid of anybody who opposed her. Now I'll flick you around again because you don't really want to see cars and what have you, but she also had a lot of bother. You know, she was worried about being executed. There was something called the Rising of the North. There was a lot of people who didn't want her on the throne. They wanted Mary, Queen of Scots, on the throne instead. And one of these people that was trying to usurp her was, was Sir Thomas Percy, the 7th Earl of Northumberland. Now, Sir Thomas Percy, after the Rising of the North, he ran away to Scotland where he thought he would be safe. However, he was betrayed and he was brought back here to York to be executed and made an example of. Now, he was going to be beheaded, and I'll show you. It was literally here, somewhere around here, they built a scaffold for him to be publicly beheaded and made an example of. Now, unlike in your Hollywood films where it's one swoop of an axe and off comes the head, you would be so lucky. You see, in those days, you might have an executioner who may or may not be experienced. That axe may or may not be sharp enough. And sometimes an executioner's life is really not pleasant. Killing people all the time is going to take some strength. So unless you're a really sick, twisted human being, you're going to have to be incredibly drunk. So a lot of executions could be botched. And you might get a young lad there who's got an axe that's not very sharp, and he goes in for the chop and he might miss, and he'll get it in your back or in your shoulder blades or halfway through your neck. Either way, he's got to shake you off and start again. Now, thankfully for Sir Thomas Percy, apparently it only took a couple of goes to get his head off, but when his head came off, they put it on top of a spike, placed it on top of Michaelgate Bar, where it would be a warning to would-be traitors. couple of weeks later, supposedly, some Catholic sympathisers took his head in the hopes that they could reunite it with his body. The problem is that his body was buried in an unmarked grave. So they decided to run off, after they couldn't find his grave, to the Holy Trinity Church on Goodramgate. I would have pointed that church out to you earlier, but unfortunately it's really well hidden and you wouldn't have seen it. But anyway, they ran off to the Holy Trinity Church on Goodramgate, buried it in an unmarked grave, said some prayers and hoped for the best. Bless them, they tried. Fast forward to, they say, about 20 odd years ago. Now, 20 odd years ago, a lady was sat in the Holy Trinity Church graveyard, minding her own business, eating her packed lunch. And then she looked to one side and suddenly saw a gentleman dressed in what looked like Tudor attire. He appeared to be stooped over. His head appeared to be bowed down as though he was looking for something. And he had some really ugly looking gouge marks and cuts in his back. Well, initially she thought, oh, here, ain't makeup good today? My goodness me, he looks really grim. Special effects are fantastic. It must be an actor from the York Dungeons. Now, 20 odd years ago, actors really did look pretty grim in the York Dungeons. Nowadays they're quite tame, and I think it's more family friendly and more child friendly. But back then, it really was quite terrifying, was the dungeons, absolutely terrifying, and they had some really nasty looking makeup. So she instantly thought, actor out on his lunch. However, why would you come out looking like that? Anyway, she ignored it, carried on eating her lunch. And this chap then walked off and disappeared around the corner. And a few minutes passed, he then came back. But this time he's facing her. And what she'd thought to be a stooped head was no head at all. And bits of neck and bone were poking out the top, and blood was pouring down his front. And she thought, yep, very good, fantastic costume that, love. You can stay over there, though I don't like it. And this actor started to walk towards her. And so she said, yeah, very funny, you can stop now. And he was still coming towards her. So she stood up and went, right, that's enough. It's not funny, I don't like it, stop. He then stopped, shuffled about a bit, and then faded and disappeared before her very eyes. It's then, of course, that she realised that's no actor, ran away wailing and screaming and carrying on, and went off back to wherever she worked down the Shambles, funny enough. Obviously had to take a sit down, told her colleagues what had happened, and her colleagues, or one of them, piped up and said, well, it's a bit far-fetched, but maybe, just maybe, it's Sir Thomas Percy looking for his head. However, he's never been seen again since. So if anybody ever fancies doing a vigil there, you pop along to the Holy Trinity Church on Goodramgate and see if you can spot a ghostly man, headless man in Tudor attire. Now I'll flick you around here. This here is St Mary's Church, not to be confused with St Mary's Abbey in the Museum Gardens. This actually belongs to the York Trust, the York Museums Trust. So if you come to York, you've got the Castle Museum, the Yorkshire Museum and the Arts Gallery, so you can get combi tickets normally, and this belongs to them. And at the moment, everything's shut, but it's potential that this will still be here when it reopens. They've got something called the Van Gogh experience. And even if you don't like art, it really, really is worth your while. It is an amazing attraction. Yes, it might be a little bit expensive compared to most things, but it's so, so good. And if you don't get dizzy, I also recommend paying the £3 extra to do the virtual reality. It's like a little VR thing that happens afterwards, and it's out of this world. It's really fantastic. But that's not why I've brought you here. Well, it is, but there's another reason. This is obviously a very, very old church. There has been lots and lots and lots of bodies buried here. There's a couple of gravestones, very dark, so you can't really see, unfortunately. I'll just come over here. There's a couple more over here. There you go. So there's one here, a few more just over there. Oh, and one here as well. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, that it? It's a bit small, isn't it? Well, if you listened to me earlier, you'll know that yes, this is not it. It's everywhere. All these buildings are actually built on top of a graveyard. Now, in the old days, we didn't really used to dig that deep for foundations, so some of the bodies we probably didn't really get to, or probably just got to them all and thought, nah, we'll leave them. But here was a different story. There's a friend of mine, I don't know if you're watching, Alan. I remember Alan telling me this story last year. And I don't specifically know which buildings exactly that it was, but his father, I think, was the builder, and he invited Alan along to have a look one day, and he says, here, son, come and have a look at this. Now, it was literally just a big open space, and I'll flick you around now. Big open space. Excuse me. And he says, have a look at this, and he looks inside a pit, and there was literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of skeletons. And Alan said, here, Dad, what's all this? Is this the graveyard? He says, oh yeah, son, it is. We've had to stop work and get the archaeological team in. And he says, all right, what are you going to do after they've been? He says, well, it's down to us to get rid of the bodies after they've been. Oh, right, well, how are you going to get rid of them? He says, I can't really. I'm just going to fill them in and build on top of them. So yeah, and you can live in some of those buildings, ladies and gents. So if you want to come to York, as well as having lots of money, you can live on top of a body, or 10 or 20 or 100 or 1,000. Imagine what poltergeist activity you'll have there. Can we go down there? No. Bit loud down there, so we're going to go down this way instead. Oh, look, runny nose weather. Before we get to our next destination, does anybody want to ask me any questions? Because I've got a little trundle now. I was hoping to go down to the Castle Museum, but it looks busy, so I can't really go down there. Excuse me, runny nose weather, sorry. So I'll take us up this way instead. You've seen the Van Gogh experience online. Oh, can you watch it online? Oh, I might do that. It was up for an award. Sadly, it didn't win last year, but it really was a fantastic experience, and the music made for it. You can't unfortunately buy the music, but the music was so soothing. It was like something out of a meditation app. Oh. I did something called the Round Trees Walk yesterday with a friend of mine who used to work with me at the museum. He's great, is Gareth. Him and Alan, they tell me all kinds of different historical facts and stuff. Separates the fact from fiction. So round here, there used to be another chocolate factory, and we think probably around here. And somewhere here, there used to be a school for Roundtrees, the Quaker school. I think that was right. Anyway, I might have just got that bit mixed up. But Roundtrees was a big thing here in York, and yesterday I shared a couple of photographs of where one of the first Roundtrees factories was near Endell. So you can look that up on the page if you're interested. Oh, we'll go down this way. This is a great story. I'm going to take you to York Dungeons, actually. York Dungeons occasionally do have ghost hunts here, and it's very interesting. So you're going to have to pop along. One of the ghosts here is really nasty, and my friend Mad Alice would be best to tell you the story, but I'm sure that if I ever come on a ghost hunt here, I'll be able to tell you a bit more about it. But that building there is the dungeons. So if you come to York and you want to do the dungeons, guys, that's where you go to. But there is meant to be a very nasty ghost who haunts there, and a lot of people have a feeling of being strangled whilst they're inside there, and we believe it's because a gentleman actually strangled a woman. Now it could be that she was a lady of the night, because this street down here, do you know what, I'll take you down there. Just I will take you down there when I cross over anyway. Excuse me. This was a bit of a red light area, and women of the night used to take men down this street, sometimes have their way with them, and other times they used to push them in the river at the bottom. Do a runner. So yes, there is a really nasty piece of work who haunts around this building, who we believe strangled a woman and drowned her down, or dumped her body in the river down there. Somebody's just asked me, where is Mad Alice? Hibernating. She's hibernating for a bit, bless her. Now she used to work here at the dungeons, and I did too, but we didn't work together. We worked at different times. But when she worked here, Mad Alice is one of these who has had some experiences of ghosts, but not a lot. And she does believe, but she's never really seen anything or witnessed anything great until more recent years. And one of those times was here at the dungeons. Now, she was told when she first started working there by one of the managers, if you encounter Sam, don't worry, he won't hurt you. He just pops in every now and then. And she says, well, who's Sam? She says, oh, it's our resident ghost. And she went, oh, okay then. She didn't think anything more about it, and she was working in this sort of Viking section. It's moved about a little bit as the dungeons now, so everything's not the same layout. But in the Viking section at the time, you used to go down a little corridor and there was a curtain. And one time she was stood waiting for the next group, and she felt like that somebody was stood nearby, and she felt like there was a looming presence just right next to her. And she was so distressed that she actually swore at him. I say at him, we don't know who was there, but she thought it's Sam. And she said an unpleasant word and told him to go away. And with that, the fire alarm suddenly went off. So obviously they had to all vacate the building. And the manageress then came up to Mad Alice, and said, why did you set the alarms off? There's no fire. And so Alice says, I didn't set the alarms off. And the manageress said, no, the alarm came from your room. You set the fire alarm off. Why? Did you accidentally lean on it? And she said, no, I was nowhere near it. I didn't touch it. And then the manageress looked her up and down and said, did you upset Sam? And she says, well, yeah, I did swear at him because he frightened me. And the manageress gave her a good telling off and said, you never, ever, ever swear at Sam. He doesn't like it and he sets the fire alarms off. So we've actually got a ghost, for real, that sets the fire alarms off in the York dungeons. Obviously they were all allowed back in after they'd been cleared of it, and knowing that it was safe to go back in. But yeah, bless her, Mad Alice had upset Sam. She's learned a lesson since. So that's another personal ghost story for you. I brought you down this way because it's nice and peaceful and it's not as slippy as when I was last here. But that there is the King's Arms, a lovely little pub. It's also known to us as the pub that floods. So unfortunately, when the river rises, and I'm going to quickly say this, guys, sometimes it'll come on the news or social media pages, and even I've posted pictures of the flooding in York. Please don't be put off by the flooding in York. It is very sad and it does disrupt things, but it is literally this area and wherever the river is. York isn't suddenly shut when there's a flood, thankfully. It's just some places, including this pub, might be. So please never be discouraged and cancel your holiday if you see things on the news, because Thankfully, we do have floodgates, we do have flood barriers, and York is basically still open for business even when there is a flood. So don't be put off, because unfortunately the news really does ruin the economy here. Now, I did read something else in the almanac, the Grim Almanac of York, I can't say that word, sorry. Somewhere along here, well, all of these buildings here have been various factories. And I can't remember his name, I only literally read it earlier, but a young lad, a 14-year-old boy, accidentally got caught up in some machinery in one of these factories. It was in 1894, I think. He got caught up in one of the machines in the factories and was mangled alive. So obviously he died. He was crushed and mangled in one of these machineries. Now, unfortunately, in the old days, children did used to work in factories. So kids, if you are watching this, yes, you used to go to work. Excuse me. You had to go to work and earn your keep from the ages of 12. They're usually about 13, 14. But even then you could be younger. If you couldn't afford to go to school, you could be working from the age of 5. And your job would be to work in a factory. Or, boys, you could be working as a chimney sweep. And get this, boys, when you're climbing up and down the chimneys, sort of be going in your eyes, your hair, your mouth, your nose, everywhere. And unfortunately, you used to get stuck up the chimney. And this would happen because whilst you're climbing and sweeping away, you would then slip. And your knees would become lodged between your chest and the brickwork. So you're now in a squat position, and no matter how hard you try, you cannot get out of that position. And if nobody could drag you down quick enough, then you suffocated to death. Even worse than that though, sometimes we couldn't always get you down. So we'd have to leave you up there until you rotted a little bit, and then you'd slide down, and then we could get rid of you. So if anybody watching lives in a house that's Victorian or older, and you have a fireplace, even if it's been since covered up and bricked up, just think, if on a night you can hear scratching, maybe it's not a pigeon, maybe it's a ghostly boy who got stuck up the chimney and died. Because I can assure you, it won't be in any deeds anywhere that you've had a death of a child up the chimney. Yeah, that's put you off your dinner, isn't it? Kate, you're glad I mentioned this. Why? Do you live in a Victorian build? Or older? I posted something not too long ago, guys. This here is the Grand Opera House. It's a bit back to front, isn't it? Hang on. That's it. This time last year, they had a show on known as Ghost Stories. You've probably watched it as a DVD or on Netflix, or the actual show itself. It's toured all over the country. Well, it was here this time last year, and this time last year I was here on a ghost hunt. And on that ghost hunt I actually quickly ran around the building. It was one of my first ever videos, if you will, just to sort of see if I could do a video really. So it's really jumpy and I'm a bit nervous, not because of ghosty stuff, but because I'm not very good with the online tech, and I wasn't sure how it's going to look and things. So the video's a bit blurry and a bit gobbledygook, but you can watch it anyway, just to sort of see the inside of the theatre there. It's a lovely little theatre. Apparently it was one of Ken Dodd's favourites, a famous comedian called Ken Dodd, and they've got one of his little tickler sticks in there and his picture obviously, and they have a room called the Ken Dodd room. But nearby that room there's another room, like a dressing room. Oh, it's a dressing room now, and the staff do not know the reason why, but there's always screams that come from this storage cupboard. They don't know the reasons why, but whenever they go to this cupboard to see if there's somebody in distress, They open up the cupboard. Silent love. They open up the cupboard and there is nobody in there. There's no rhyme or reason for there to be screams there or anything of the sort. I'm just going to make an attempt to cross this road now, guys. Whew. There we go. But also, we were walking around the auditorium and I was in the dress circle, I think it was, or were we in the upper circle? It was one of the two. And we had the ushers working with us that night, and they knew all the ghosts and the haunts and things inside the building, but they wouldn't tell us anything because they wanted to know what we'd discover. And we picked up on a little boy, and we said we think that this little boy probably fell, and suggested that perhaps he fell off the balcony of the either the upper circle or the dress circle. Anyway, the usher went deathly pale and he says, yeah, you're absolutely right. We have on record that a little boy called Freddie fell to his death from the dress circle whilst watching a performance at the opera house, which is really sad, but his ghost still haunts there. Now, whilst they were all trying to communicate with this ghost, sometimes on ghost hunts I like to take myself away because I find that lots of people, when they're talking at the same time, you can never hear the ghost. You're never going to pick up on anything if everybody's talking constantly. Thankfully, paranormal research are really good. They don't do that very often. It depends on the people that come, really. But there is a lot of ghost hunts out there that do this. And it kind of defeats the object. If you're trying to communicate, you need to ask the question and then wait quietly for more than half a second before you start talking again. Otherwise, these spirits are never going to get a word in edgeways. I will get my words out. Anyway, Freddie, I thought to myself, isn't with them. He might be behind me, or somebody else might be behind me. Either way, I felt a presence, and my camera isn't that great, but I thought I'll try and take a picture. Sorry. I'll try and take a picture, and you will see just slightly further down the page that I took a picture, and it looks like that there is a shadow figure sat behind me. In fact, there might be several shadow figures sat behind me, so do have a look after this video. I'll just have a look at this comment here. The little boy from Bedern, I once took a photo and there was a clear image of a boy, who I called Oliver, as he looked like him. Same place as you described tonight. Could be. I mean, the lad that died was called George Lazenby. Excuse me. Whew. I think it was in the Yorkshire Press or the Yorkshire Herald that it might have been found that, but it was put in this book called The Grim Almanac of York, if that's how you pronounce it. I'm a terrible person. I can't always pronounce my words. Can't remember dates, can't remember numbers, and yet I'm a tour guide. Shocking. But there you go. It's just I have so much knowledge in my head that I just can't always remember everything. And as I actually told people in a previous video, I didn't do very well in school. Everything I know is self-taught or from Future Learn or from working in museums and obviously having a great interest in stuff. But whatever I tell you has been well researched, and I like to consider that whatever I tell you is factual. These stories tonight, these are all what I believe to be true, and if I think it's not true, then I will tell you. I'm not going to tell you something and then say, oh yes, this happened. I don't like to glorify ghosts and ghost hunting because in my opinion it is real, and there is a lot of things that we can debunk, but I really do like to tell the history because the history is truly harrowing, and I think it's time that we knew the truth and taught the truth in schools rather than just going over the same things, because I've just done these courses online and there's so many things that we watch on telly and stuff, and it's just all dramatised and we get this wrong opinion. For example, Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, excuse me, yes, she was a great queen, but she was also very vain, and she wouldn't allow people in her court, males, who were her favourites, to marry, and she got very upset with them if they did, and made life very difficult. She was so vain right up to the day she died. And she was happy as well. She was a good queen, but she also was very much like, I actually called her in one of the comments on the course the Bette Davis or Joan Crawford of the time. A very vain woman, but strong woman. And funny enough, there is a movie out there from either the 1930s or 1940s starring Bette Davis as Elizabeth. While it's not the best historical film in the world, it's historically inaccurate, she does portray quite a good queen, as I would see Elizabeth, quite vain. One of the best Elizabeth movies, though, probably is, oh gosh, what's her name? It was made in the late 90s and early 2000s. There's two of them. Elizabeth I and Elizabeth the Golden Age. Can't remember the name of the actress, but her father used to be in Rising Damp, I think. If it's the same actress I'm thinking of. Oh, no, it's not. No, it's not. It's a different one. Can't remember. Terrible. I always get her mixed up with Kate. It's Cate Blanchett, sorry. No, the other actress I was thinking of was from Underworld, whose father was in Rising Damp. That's it. There you go. There, we've gone completely off topic now. Oh, I finally got to where I wanted to be. Oh. Now this here, guys, is the Mansion House. This is where the Lord Mayor of York lives. This was built for the Lord Mayor in the Georgian era. Now the old Lord Mayor, or Lord Mayoress, he or she will live in the upper levels there. But the rest of it is a museum, which you can come and visit. And I shall just quickly pull up a pew here. You can come and visit. I have done a ghost hunt here, and surprisingly it was very quiet on this ghost hunt. Not an awful lot happened, but we did have one incident when we was in this room here, which is like a big green ballroom, and in the room behind it there's like a mannequin, a headless mannequin of all things, sat on a chair at a desk. There's no access to that little room except for climbing over an open stairwell, which nobody's going to do except for staff. There was nobody in that area at the time. We were all stood in this green ballroom doing a séance, believe it or not, and then suddenly we heard a bang. We left that room and could immediately see that the mannequin had fallen over from the chair all by itself, but there's no drafts there. This mannequin had been sat there for weeks and weeks and weeks, had never once moved, and so we did wonder if maybe somebody had pushed it of the spirit world. But otherwise, nothing happened that night as such, which was a great shame. But the grim thing in this building is that in the same room there is a huge painting just in the corner of the room, and it's like a cupboard, you can open up the painting. Behind the painting is a mummified cat. Yes, a mummified cat. And the reason, I think, they discovered it in the rooftop of this building a few years ago, and they didn't know why, and so I put it to them. I said, look, what else did you find? And they've got it on display. There's a shoe, there's a hammer, and some bones. And I said, right, that is the classic rituals for a house protection. You see, in the old days, to protect us from witches and demons and devils and things like that, bad spirits, they used to put a hammer and a shoe inside the walls. And the reason for the shoe, allegedly, was so that the spirit or the witch or whoever that might come into the house, instead of looking for you and your spirit, your soul, they would mistakenly pick your shoe as being you, and hopefully it would make them go to the shoe and stay with the shoe all night and protect you. It's ridiculous, but these are the things we used to believe. But also the cat would be there to ward off spirits, and sometimes cats used to get walled up in buildings, dead or alive, and that is terrible. But these are the things we used to believe in. So you will hear lots of stories about cats being found inside the walls of buildings. And amazingly, we found one in there. But what's more crazy is the fact that that building was built in the Georgian period, when you would think that witchcraft had kind of gone out of fashion and superstitions, but it hadn't. So whoever the Lord Mayor was at the time, whenever that cat was installed in the walls, was obviously very, very superstitious. Whew. Oh, and this is another one I want to show you. Judges Court. This narrow stretch here will take you to the back of these buildings to Judges Court, the original Judges' lodgings. Excuse me. Now, in the old days, that's where the judge used to live, and they would work at the castle prison and condemn people. Sorry, the castle prison, the York Assizes, which is next to the castle prison, where they would obviously put you on trial and see whether you're going to be committed for a crime, put in prison, or put in the Knavesmire to be executed, whatever. But for years and years and years, there used to always be like a really loud clinking sound, and it sounded like the spurs on a boot. But whenever people were looking around, they could never ever see who was making the sound with their boots. And they do know that there used to be a judge who lived there who was quite hanging happy. He used to hang people for the littlest of crimes, left, right and centre. So he was a really bad judge. But I think he got his comeuppance in the end and ended up on the noose himself. But anyway, it went on for years, to this thing where people could hear somebody walking up and down that alleyway and into the judge's court, but they couldn't work out why. And then a few years ago they were digging around and renovating, and they discovered that there is actually a well just in front of the building, not where we've been, and you have to go down the corridor and you'll find an open space before you get to the building. But in front of it there was a well. What did they find in the well? They found a skeleton. What was the skeleton wearing? Boots. What were on the boots? Spurs. So yes, we found the body, but it would appear that the ghost is not at peace. He might be at peace now he's been found, but at the time, we used to always hear him walking about, and we assume that perhaps he was murdered by the judge, but we'll never ever know. So if you want to stay at the judge's court, because it's a hotel, you can. Good luck walking down that Snickle Way on a night, won't you? I know I've told this one recently, but since we're down Coney Street, I'll retell it to you. This is the one that you need your box of tissues for. I'll flick you around now. Now then, let me get this straight. Around this area here, I think it's further down that way, there used to be the old Black Swan Hotel. Now don't get that confused with the Black Swan pub on Peacehome Green. Yeah, it's down over there. So around that area there was the hotel. Now it was a coaching inn hotel, and there used to be a chap who lived in Sheriff Hutton called Tom. And Tom was a lovely lad who was destined to be married to a lass called Nance. Unfortunately, Nance had her head turned by another chap who came along, declaring his love for her and saying that he would look after her and offer her wealth and riches beyond her wildest dreams. And so, as much as she loved Tom, in those days a woman really needed security, and so she opted to run off with this bloke just weeks before she was due to marry poor Tom. Anyway, a year passed and Tom moved away from Sheriff Hutton and lived in York, and he was a coach driver, and he used to ride coaches from the Black Swan Hotel to all over the various locations like Hull, County Durham and around Yorkshire, and he'd obviously ride along all the really old roads. And one day when he was on his way back to the Black Swan Hotel, he encountered a lady huddled up in the road, and she was holding a child, a small boy, a baby. And he instantly recognised her as being his Nance. And so he pulled the coach over and bundled her into the carriage, and she was clearly very sick and very unwell. And he brought her back to the hotel and asked one of the people there to look after her. And later that day, they told her that Nance isn't going to make it. You need to go see her. So Tom went and sat with Nance, and obviously he still loved Nance. And she turned around and told him how sorry she was, what she did. She had to do it for her, her safety and her future, but it turned out it was the biggest mistake of her life, because this gentleman was not who he said he was. It turned out he was already married and he was a highwayman. So he had his way with her and then dumped her and left her to fend for herself. She obviously then had this child, and since then she's become gravely ill. She asked of Tom if he could forgive her and if he would be kind enough to take the son on as his own, her son on as his own, and look after him and raise him. And Tom, like I said, was very much in love with her. He did forgive her. He felt very sorry for her, and he took on the boy, and sadly, yes, Nance did pass away. So, heartbroken, he carries on being a coach driver, but he raises the boy as his own, and about 2 or 3 years pass. And he's riding from County Durham, and he's got some very important gentlemen who have promised to pay him so many shillings if he can get them to the Black Swan Hotel in time for the meetings. Now, there used to be some very big meetings that would be held at the Black Swan Hotel, and I think some would be to do with race meetings, the races at the Knavesmire. Don't quote me, but I think something along those lines. Anyway, it was a very important meeting, needed to get back. So, excuse me, he promised them, yep, absolutely, I'll get you back there, no problem. I've done this journey many times before. And he's riding along, and suddenly he's about 10 miles away from York. And unfortunately, around York, it can get very misty, even in summer, lots of mist. And on this particular night, it wasn't just mist, it was fog, thick fog that suddenly appeared. And he was crestfallen by this point, because he knew he would not get these men there on time, and he was going to be late and probably not get paid his fee. So he slowed down to a very, very slow trot, and as he was trotting along through the fog, trying to find his way, he suddenly saw a figure in the road. And as he got closer, he instantly knew who it was. It was Nance. Suddenly, Nance was no longer in the middle of the road, though. She was sat beside him. And he didn't look to his side, he knew it was her, and her ghostly fingers went across his hands and grabbed hold of the reins and snapped the horses into action. And so the horses galloped as fast as life through the thick fog. Now, the men in the carriage were a bit nervous and were shouting at him to slow down, because you can't see through the fog, they're going to have an accident. But Tom, he just smiled and ignored him and allowed Nance to take the reins and carry on, because he knew that she would protect him. And lo and behold, with just a few minutes to spare, they got back to York, and they got back to the Black Swan Hotel, and he got his fee. And he suddenly felt her hands disappear, and he did cry. Of course he cried, but he was so grateful that she was there to help him in his hour of need. And he then told the story to her son when he got older, and he said, "You rest assured that whenever you are in trouble on the roads, your mother, Nance, will be there. And I'm sure she'll be there for your children and your children's children, and so on and so forth." And it would happen that every now and again, years from then, that sometimes there would be a bit of bother on the road, and some ghostly spectral lady would, I can't say it, spectre of a lady would turn up. Oh, put me away now, just have done with it. This lady would turn up, a ghostly white lady who would help guide you. It's said that only a few years ago, along a road which then later became, or it was nearby what is now the A64, that some gentlemen were riding along and a lady appeared, frightened the life out of them, but she was trying to point in another direction, and so they went off in a totally different direction to what they would have taken, and it turned out that there was some highway robbers on the road they would have taken, and so she rescued them from those highwaymen. But we do have lots of stories about people driving along the A64 and varying roads. Don't get run over, speaking of roads. And a lady would just appear, a ghostly lady in white would appear and frighten the life out of people. So don't have a crash if you see a ghostly white lady, guys, okay? She's probably just there to make sure that you're going to be all right. So don't freak out. Bear that in mind. And there you have it. And now for my last story for you. I wanted to bring you here earlier and then take you to the castle, but there was quite a lot of people on moped who probably would have interfered. So I'm sorry about that. But over here, you'll see there is a tower. That there is Clifford's Tower. Now it's undergoing a bit of TLC. Last time I told you I was up for an audition to do the voiceover work for it, but unfortunately I didn't win. But I got some glowing feedback. They were a lovely bunch of people, and they said we couldn't actually criticise you in any way, Mackenzie. It was just that we slightly liked this other person better, but otherwise you were spectacular. I was like, oh, thank you. So maybe they'll keep me in mind for other future work, who knows. But anyway, Clifford's Tower is a museum, and when it's finished being renovated and tidied up and stopped from falling down, we will then be allowed back in. So I'm sorry about how it looks at the moment. However, you may be able to notice there's a little bit of yellow all the way around it. Now I'm pleased about that because I'm going to tell you quite a horrible story now. In the year 1190, now you may have seen a post about this just a few days ago. In March 1190, this was the site of a most horrific massacre. Now, it wasn't this specific building. There was a tower here before this one. It was made out of wood. But, excuse me, basically 150 Jewish people were rounded up in the tower. They all lived in York. They all had businesses and livelihoods and everything. But the people of York were quite sick of the Jews. Not just because of the religion, but because, guess what? They all owed them money. Yep, they all owed them lots of money, and rather than pay them back, they conspired against them, and there was allegedly some word from the king saying, kill the Jews. It was actually Chinese whispers, and they got it totally wrong. But these poor people, men, women and children, were rounded up in the tower. The Christians surrounded the tower and threatened to kill them unless they converted to Christianity. However, the Jews knew that this was one big lie, and rather than die at the hands of the Christians, they decided to take their own lives. So the husbands, excuse me, the husbands would slit the throats of their wives and their children. The men would then go to the chief rabbis who would slit their throats in turn, and anybody else who wanted to, if they wished, could slit their own throats or go out and face the Christians. Otherwise, there was a fire set inside the building, and other people did leave the building and were unfortunately caught out by the Christians and executed, mauled to death there and then on the spot. So that is the tragic, truthful history of what actually took place here in the year 1190. Now, we do have a plaque around there to tell you the story and to commemorate them, but also to commemorate them. You see it's full of daffodils. Every year, every single year, literally thousands and thousands and thousands of daffodils will come up in memory of them. We planted all these here in memory of them, and this is what you have every single year, and it looks beautiful. Obviously it doesn't look very pretty right now of all the scaffolding, but that's there for a reason. Now, the one story is that sometimes on the white walls you can see blood dripping down the walls representing the blood of the Jews. But the Jews didn't die in this specific tower. But also the blood isn't really blood. It turns out that the stone is made out of it's limestone, but when rainwater hits it, sometimes there's a chemical reaction and it just makes it look red, and that's why they say it's the blood of the Jews, but it's not. It's just a scientific chemical that reacts. A scientific, you know what I mean, it's a chemical that reacts, and that's the scientific explanation, sorry. Now, somebody's just mentioned the name Rebecca. Yes! I'll flick you around here, because we are going to get some people interfering. It's another reason why I get nervous, I'm sure, because I just worry about who's going to come along and Twitter. If you can hear a whistling, by the way, it's a mosquito alarm coming from the museum down there, and it's just to try and keep people away. People, like I said, kids on motorbikes. Don't always work, sadly. Sorry, runny nose. So, Rebecca. Now, there was a past life regression that took place, several years ago now. And this lady, she'd never been to York, didn't know anything about York or anything at all, and she claimed that in her past life, during this regression, that she was a little girl who was Jewish. Her name was Rebecca, and she was killed in a tomb in a church, not far away from a tower. So obviously they pieced it all together and thought, well, there was a massacre that took place in a tower, and the only thing we can think of is church. A church which is over there, which is the one I've just shown you, St Mary's Church with the Van Gogh experience. And so, excuse me, sorry, I'm just keeping an eye out. They put it all together and thought, well, maybe that is the church where this girl was killed, along with her family. But there is no tomb or undercroft or anything like that inside St Mary's Church. So they instantly cast this to one side and thought, nah, it's rubbish, it's probably just a lucky guess. Anyway, a few years later, after this took place, there was a little excavation going on inside the church, largely because some of the floor had fallen in. Anyway, they went inside and found that, yeah, actually, in the church, there used to be an undercroft, and they found some dead bodies, obviously skeletons, very old indeed, one of which was a child, and they had clearly been murdered, they'd been butchered. So they then looked back to this past life regression therapy that had been done for this lady, and they've often thought maybe there was a little girl called Rebecca whom lived as a Jew here in York, and unfortunately was killed with her family and others inside the church, the undercroft of St Mary's. So that is the terrible, tragic story of Clifford's Tower, and then later Rebecca with the church. So there you have it. The ghosts we claim in Clifford's Tower are that we can hear screams. People often feel a very sickly feeling inside, or a very dizzy feeling. And it's only a few weeks ago, a lady, oh bless, I can't remember her name now, I'm really sorry if you're watching, but she emailed me to say that when she visited York years ago, she was just walking along inside the Clifford's Tower, and I'll just turn it around again. You can walk along the tops there, but she wasn't looking out towards the city, she was looking inside, and she suddenly felt horrific, and she just wanted to jump into the centre, which is basically a sheer drop. And whoever she was with grabbed hold of her and said, "What are you doing?" She says, "Get me down, I don't want to be up here, I want to jump down." Which is ridiculous. And when she came downstairs, she said, "I feel absolutely horrific, I need to leave." And so she left. But she didn't know the reason why. She didn't know anything about the story other than that this massacre took place, but she hadn't really thought about it until she watched one of my videos a few weeks ago, and she emailed me and said, "Do people feel this way when they visit the Clifford's Tower?" And I said, "I have heard of odd stories of people feeling quite rough when they visit the tower, but yes, do be careful if you visit. Don't start jumping off the cliff or anything like that." It was you, Shirley. Yes, it was Shirley. I wanted to say Marion. I don't know why. I think it was because there was another lady who emailed. I get lots of emails from loads of people, so I do apologise, Shirley. Yeah, there you go, Shirley. Thank you for letting me share your story. I remembered it as best as I could. Oh, excuse me. Darren Turner, was it the Grizzly Almanac? It's called the Grim Almanac of York. I don't think it's an I think it's ALMANAC of York. There you go, I think. There you go. Putting my spelling to the test now as well. Right, guys, that concludes the end of tonight's tour. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm sorry that there's a lot of repeated stories. There's only so many stories you can tell. There were some areas I would... Oh, too loud over there. There's some areas I would have liked to have taken us to tonight, but I noticed there was a lot of people about. I know it doesn't look like it on the camera, but they can interfere with online stuff. I don't know. I think people, as soon as they see a camera, they make a beeline for it. So it really is difficult to do these outside sometimes. So when we reopen, I might just get a little chaperone. Kate, if you're there, I know you offered your services once, so you're more than welcome to come out sometime. But at some point this month, if I get a chance, I've not been able to because I've had a... If you've been watching, you'll know I've got 2 cats. Well, I've got one poorly pussycat at the moment, Sebastian. He's been quite ill, we don't know why. But he's getting better now. He's got some antibiotics and seems a bit more perky now. Hopefully he's just had an infection. So I've been quite busy this last week looking after him and myself because I ended up in hospital again, but it was just an infection. I'm all right, don't panic. What a week. But I am hoping either next week or the week after to pop along to Nunnington Hall in their gardens, because the gardens are now open, and I'm going to record a ghost story for you. I don't think I will be able to do it live because it's in the middle of nowhere. I say the middle of nowhere, it's about 10 miles away from York. But 10 miles away in a foresty area is probably not going to have much signal. So if I can't do it live at random, then I will just record it and then I'll post it on on Facebook when I get a chance, okay? If you've not been able to watch tonight, don't panic. I will upload it onto YouTube later on. And what else is to tell you? Only that my next talk is going to be taking place at home, so I won't be as nervous, hopefully. Next week is about the executions, famous executions, not just in York, but in Britain. And then the following week, I'm going to do horrible histories of medicine, from Vikings to Victorian, Tudor, whatever, you name it. It's going to be all horrible dentistry and medicines and all the weird and wonderful things we used to do. A lot of you are instantly going to go, leeches and bleeding. Well, yes, there was that, but there was lots of other things as well. So we're going to do that. And then when things do open up again later this year, if I can get the brass together and if we don't go into lockdown, I do want to travel out to different locations in the UK and do some more history talks and if they have them, ghost stories for you. So you're going to get a lot of new stuff. That's the plan. But obviously I do have to focus on the actual tours themselves. So I'm sorry there won't be weekly videos and things like that anymore. But I will do my best to certainly do one a month or one every couple of months so that you can still get your bit of history and ghosty stories from me. I know that a lot of you live across the pond and in different locations around the globe, so you can't come and visit. But I promise I will try and entertain you all as best as I can. All right? I'm starting to lose my voice as well. I need a drink. I'm not doing very well tonight. It's not as good as normal. I'm so sorry. I'm just had such a tiring time. I'm not with it at all. But that was pretty spooky with the Lady Peckett's yard and Bedern. That was worrying. I really genuinely thought something was going to spring out on me in Bedern just because I'd found out the truth. Oh, Now then, before I leave you all, does anybody have any questions? And now, don't worry, I will go through this video later tonight and tomorrow and answer all the best I can, okay? Oh, and one last thing I always forget. Excuse me. If you did enjoy tonight and you want to say thank you by donating, then please send just a little donation to Shadows of York. So the link is actually attached to this video. I've stopped posting it because I know that sometimes people get a bit unsure because there is a lot of scammers out there. So I'm just going to tell you what it is now, and I'll probably comment at the bottom here and tell you what it is. So it's paypal.me/Shadows of York if you wish to make a little donation just to say thank you. Because unfortunately myself, along with all the other tour guides in the country, probably not the ones that have been on the go for 30 odd years, but certainly us newbies, we don't get a great deal from the government. Even with the recent grant, yeah, we don't get a lot. So we've been living off universal credit, which is about 500 quid a month or something. Maybe a bit more if you rent. You know, they get a bit more if you're older, because apparently I'm not old enough to qualify for more, which is ridiculous. So yeah, if you want to make a donation just to say thank you, please do. It really, really does help us. And not just to myself, but to lots of us. Anybody that's entertained you, or if you've got a local shop that supplies you with food and stuff, please go local. You know, try and help the economy, help your locals and your friends and family. The supermarkets will look after themselves, don't you worry about that. Anyway, hopefully we'll all be out of it very soon. But in the meantime, please stay safe, guys. It really is still very dangerous. We've all got to look after ourselves. Keep washing your hands, wear your masks, and we'll all be able to hug each other again soon and get to the pub. My first port of call shall be Valhalla. And what's the other one? Trembling Madness. Those are two great pubs in York. You've got to go to them. Questions? Let's have a look. Louise, go have some rum. I will, don't you worry. Thank you for tonight. Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you. Sorry, just looking through your comments, seeing if there's any questions. By the way, just to point out, tonight's stories that you've heard aren't the same that you get on tour. So if you are going to come on tour, you may have heard them in the past, but it's not the same. It's a totally different route. And I take you to very quiet areas of York as well, so you generally don't get bothered by too many people, thankfully. So do pop along to the tour for real if you come. Don't assume that the video is exactly the same. And I do tend to change the tour up a little bit every now and then, so you get different stories. Thank you. There's so many people saying thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I can't see any questions, so if I've missed anything, don't worry. I will definitely answer your questions as best as I can, all right? And if I've missed anything, feel free to message me. Now, I think I've waffled on for long enough now. I'm going to let you all go, and I'm going to drive home, get warm and see the cats. Yeah, Karen, it is Sebastian. He's feeling a bit unwell. He's had too many kitty treats, I'm sure. He keeps telling me that he hasn't, but I bet he has. He just won't have told me. Right. Thank you so much. Take care of yourselves. Night, night. Mwah. Love you all. Bye for now.